Hello everyone, my name is Vlad Ladichev.
And my name is Nick Rosa.
And on this podcast we will explore and learn together about the changes in the business, society and the economy due to the acceleration of AI.
Welcome to the AI Shift podcast.
So, hello everyone, welcome to AI Shift podcast. And today we have a very special guest.
Yes, today we have a pioneer in the field of immersive technologies and AI, a friend that is gonna talk to us about also his latest book that you just read, Vlad, and you really enjoyed, right?
Yes, and I discovered for myself the beauty and the complexity of the topic of AI-powered metaverse. So I cannot be excited more of having Alvin today as our guest.
Exactly, and you already announced our guest. It's a pleasure and an honor to have with us Alvin Wang Graylin. Hi, Alvin, how are you?
Oh, thanks, Nick and Vlad. It's been a pleasure. I've been looking forward to our chat. We've known each other a long time, so this will be fun.
Yeah, I mean, we met ages ago. I mean, probably was in 2018 or 2019 when I started
even before then, I think. You've been in this space for a while and making big waves. So I'm just following your footsteps.
Well, you've been one of the pioneers, and you studied also with one of the pioneers. You were with Professor Tom Furness at the Human Interface Lab. And then you moved.
1991, I studied with Tom. So it's been a long haul seeing XR going through its ups and downs. But I think we're definitely getting to a point where it's going to make an inflection. Having like this year, having Apple come in, and very soon I think Google and Samsung are going to be releasing new products, and HTC continues to release new products as well. That we've got some really big players that are in the XR space, and and AI is actually a big help. A lot of people think AI actually takes away from the shine of XR, but it's actually the opposite. With AI getting involved, essentially all aspects of XR depends on AI, and now it's going to solve a lot of the issues that's kept AI from really growing and being adopted. We can talk more in detail after. I'm jumping into a little too quickly.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm super excited about this conversation because we have so much to cover. But one of the things that excites me the most is the fact that you have a real background in research. You've been studying this stuff. You've been doing the lab research with Tom Furness, and then you moved to IBM, and then you helped basically HTC to launch the Vive globally, and you became the poster boy of XR for a long time. You want to tell us a little bit more about your background, just for the viewers that don't know you and maybe would like to know more about your life, and that's to make it a little bit more personal.
I'll give a quick summary, but usually I've been in my entire life. So I've started coding when I was 9 and haven't really stopped, and have been working on everything from chips to boards, to systems, to apps, to websites, to data networks. And then, the last 8 years have been with HTC, really building and launching some of the best XR devices in the world, as well as the whole backend systems, the stores, the Metaverse platforms that we've built. And at the same time, working with researchers across, essentially dozens of universities to do backend research to make sure that the things that we are building is safe and healthy and productive for the world. So, and a lot of those studies were also discussed in the book, which I don't think a lot of attention outside before, because a lot of them were in Asia research institutes. So the research they didn't get a lot of publication. But I think you'll see that we really want to make sure that whatever we put out is something that is safe and healthy, and it's also something that will help us be more productive, help us learn better, and improve our lives.
I want to cover a little bit more, start covering a little bit more about your book. You created this book about the metaverse and our next reality, along with Louis Rosemberg, which is also a friend and has also been one of the guests of one of my previous podcasts. And the book is very interesting, and I found it fascinating the way that it develops and many of the topics that it covers. One of the things that I found fascinating is the way that you structure the book. The fact that you have Louis that has been working a lot of years in AR first and then AI, that is more like a most cautious, as a more cautious view of the adoption of the technology, and as a less optimistic view about the future of the technology, while you see this technology unlocking a new golden age for humanity and society. Would you like to tell us a little bit more what's behind the development of this book? What drove you to, the drive to what gave you the drive to write this book, and what are the main concept that you're covering in this book? That's obviously we're gonna unpack later during the podcast.
Before I answer, I do want to thank you for all your help during that process, because you had your book out before, and we had a couple of chats when I was going through the development process and writing process, and your advice was very helpful. So thank you.
Pleasure.
For all that support. And regarding your question about this book here, Our Next Reality, the impetus for it is because Louis have been in the AI and XR space for 30 plus years. So we've seen it go through its ups and downs. We've seen the false starts it has. And because of that, we also recognize that this time it is different. I know people say that, this time is different, but it actually is different. And there's a lot of things coming together at the same time that reinforces each other and solves a lot of the problems that each of these technologies have. And because of that, the impact that this combination of technologies will have on our world is going to be dramatic. And that type of impact, the world is actually not ready to cope with. So the reason for writing this book is to make that more clear and aware for people, and to make it in a balanced way, right? Because most people, they find books that reinforce what they already know. So they're not learning anything new, and they just feel like, oh, I already knew that, so now I feel smarter. But the problem is that when you only seek out reinforcing information, it doesn't help you improve your knowledge, and it doesn't help you make better decisions. So this book is written in a way where it's a debate between myself and Louis. And as Nick mentioned, Louis takes a more pessimistic position, and I take a more optimistic position. And even though we're both nuanced in somewhere in between, but we did that to make the book a little bit clearer for the reader. And we're both writing it from the perspective of actually practitioners, because we both in space building VR products, building AI products over decades, and knowing the complexities of doing it, and knowing the complexities of going to market with them, and the issues we'll have with adoption, and the issues of misuse. All these things, it's hard for somebody who's, let's say, just a reporter who spends a little bit of time researching to write a book of this nature. And both of us actually have very deep technical backgrounds. So we also tackle some of the technical issues that actually are obstacles to both adoption as well as development and commercialization. And so I think it gives us a certain level of insight that is difficult to find in other books. So I think that's the thing. And then at the end of the book, we also are focused on giving people an impetus to take action. And we give this tips for readers section, that no matter if you're a government policymaker, a corporate leader, iLab, or XR platform, what should you do to help lead us towards that positive end? Because if we don't do anything, the default actually will probably be a more negative outcome. It may not be as extreme as some of the examples in the book, but I think we are actually leaning towards the negative, just as we've seen with social media, where when you leave it to human nature and capitalism to drive it, it will be tended to be used for self-good or for profit. And that doesn't always lead to a positive end for society.
And you are, in the first paragraphs of your book, you're talking about the inevitability of the metaverse, and the metaverse is coming. And you have a very simple but very powerful definition of the metaverse that you give in the book. Would you like to give this definition to our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that one of the issues with the term metaverse is that there's so many people that have given it definitions, and it confuses the market. And everybody tries to own that word, particularly 2 or 3 years ago when it was the hot buzzword. And when that happens, it just confuses the heck out of the market. Nobody knows what it really means. And when it doesn't have clear meaning, it actually has a negative connotation, and people just dismiss it. And I think it's also important to mention that the term metaverse isn't really the important thing. It's the concept behind it, right? And as you know, Neil Stevenson, who coined the word metaverse, he wrote the foreword for a book, and I checked kind of with him my definition, and he was actually quite okay with it. And I think we need to simplify, right? The simple way to think about what the metaverse is the 3D version of the internet that we've been building for 3 or 4 decades. Right? And that's it. It's actually not that complicated. Now, I think near term, a lot of people will use 2D devices, phones, tablets, PCs to interface with it, just like we do with video games in a 3D world. But longer term, we're going to be using these kind of devices that are headsets, or later on probably smaller glasses type form factors that will be something that we wear on our head often and will naturally be the way we interface, because it's a lot easier to interface with something that's already on your head than to pull something out of your pocket or go and sit down in front of a screen. Right. So I think that's the simple definition, 3D version of the internet. And instead of having hundreds of millions of websites, which we do today, or millions of apps, we will have hundreds of millions of virtual worlds, or maybe even billions of virtual worlds, because I think every single person on earth will become a creator with the help of AI, and they can create virtual worlds that people can come and visit. Instead of driving over or flying over to visit somebody, you could just put on a glasses and headset and join somebody in their virtual world and have that face-to-face contact that we feel today, that becomes a visceral experience instead of just seeing somebody on the screen.
Many people are at the moment really surprised about the speed of the development, also in the AI space, but also in robotics, or for example, in virtual simulations. And I'm really impressed how in the background, all these technologies and advancements actually support each other. So for example, for training AI, we can use virtual environments at the moment. Having these virtual environments needs a lot of 3D assets, and we can use the AI to create these 3D assets. And
yes,
for all of this, we need computational power, and to have ability to scale it needs powerful platforms. And this all happening in the background. And what we see as a consumers, the tip of this iceberg, as maybe some consumer products. And in your book, you described very intangible how these technologies, Metaverse and AI, strengthen each other. So maybe you could elaborate this point a bit.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty clear that XR technology and metaverse requires AI in the sense of everything from our natural interfaces, hand-eye tracking, voice recognition, in real-time translation, real-time virtual world creation, text to 3D models or to worlds are already a thing and becoming more so, I think, in the near future, as well as let's say AI in the background. All the NPCs will be more and more natural versus today's NPCs have kind of a fixed few lines that they talk to, and it just becomes boring the second time or third time you talk to them. But we will essentially have NPCs that can have long-term conversations and memory of what you have been doing, and that makes these worlds come alive, right? So I think that part most people understand. What most people don't understand is actually XR will be a critical part of making AI more mature and possible. Last week I was in Singapore talking at the Augmented World Expo Asia, and that was one of my key kind of concepts, is that here are all the things that XR is doing that actually will solve problems for AI, because AI people talk about, oh, we're running out of data. Well, as Vlad just mentioned, we're going to have simulation environments that help you create that data, whether it's 2D data or 3D data. Training robots to work in homes, or training. Tesla uses XR essentially to train their autonomous driving in edge cases. You're not going to find very strange cases all the time, and this allows you to know what to do in those cases. We also think about, people talk about alignment with AI, and how do we know if this AI pretends to be benign and then all of a sudden becomes evil 2 years or 10 years from now? Well, let's simulate that. Let's put them into sandbox XR environments, worlds that they can play, and let them get more mature and see what happens when they become that next level AI, and do they actually start to behave in evil ways? People don't really talk about that, but you see the movie Matrix. Essentially, we're talking about doing the Matrix, but instead of having humans in a Matrix, actually put these intelligent agent AIs into this Matrix, let them live 1,000 generations, and see what they do, right? And if they are happy and helpful and become smarter and supportive and compassionate, then I think we may not have as big of an issue with alignment as people think. Because a lot of the complaints about alignment is not that we cannot align in terms of having a peaceful coexistence, is that we only have one chance. Because I don't know if you ever read the Eliezer Yudkowsky, his thing is, we only have one chance to get it right, and if we can't get it right, then we're all dead. and and the chance of getting it right is essentially zero. So we're 100% going to be dead. It's like, I don't think we need to be that fatalistic about this technology. So having XR simulations, and people are already doing it today. I think last week I just saw that somebody did in Minecraft, several hundred agents,
Yes.
having them live with each other, create a community, seeing how they interact, seeing how they actually create a marketplace within each other to grow a business, to grow a religion. It's interesting to see how these fairly, I guess, early stage AI is already behaving in this way. And I think that the smarter they get, the more we will be able to find information from that. The other thing is, for one of the biggest issues AI is going to create is not this AI takeover, it's actually job displacement, right? We will find that hundreds of millions of people will be displaced from their current work. Now, what do they need to do? How do they maintain their sanity? How do they maintain a sense of purpose? What do they do with their time? How do we re-educate them? All of these things can actually be solved with a massive global metaverse infrastructure. Because when you have that, you create a parallel economy in a parallel world that allows you to train people anywhere in the world, give them free access, border-free access to labor pools, to resources, and to be able to have a cross-border sharing of resources, cross-border redistribution of wealth in a smooth, natural way, instead of something that is manufactured or forced, which we know just doesn't work. And if somebody who is somewhere else in the world who lives in a relatively lesser developed market, they may be able to get a higher level income to service a company or a person somewhere else in a more developed market. Because when you're in the metaverse, it doesn't matter where you live, who you were born to, what you look like, and what clothes you wear. All it matters is your intelligence, your creativity, and your motivation to get things done. And I think that's something that creates equality among us, which is sorely missing today. And the other thing is it actually gives people purpose, because when right now too many of us tie our identity and our purpose in life to our work. And if all of a sudden, particularly white collar workers, are going to be the first wave of people that will be displaced by AI, you're going to have this massive mental health issue where people are like, what am I doing? I'm at home. I have nothing to do. Nobody's calling me. I don't feel needed. But we actually now immediately create a place where you can go and train yourself, go and create worlds, use these AI to speak into existence amazing art or music or virtual experiences, and then share it with the world. I think that actually may be a bigger purpose for us in terms of creating art and beauty and culture versus just moving PowerPoints or Excel files from one place to another, reading everybody's email, writing an email with an AI to have another read your email and then summarize it to somebody else. That's a lot of people's lives today, but that's what is used to pay their salaries, right? And so they do it not because they want to, because they have to. When we get to the point where AI becomes more mature, it will actually create so much productivity that we will have an option to say, do we want to work or not? And that extra productivity will allow companies to be able to give us 1, 2, 3-day work weeks instead of 5-day work weeks. It will allow governments to be able to afford to have UBI across a broader swath of the world. Right now, maybe only a few countries have pseudo safety nets for their citizens. But I think that's something that is actually very achievable long term. And you saw in the book, I actually look at the different levels of productivity across the world and how that leads to shorter work hours and higher benefits. And the fact that there is such a big disparity between the rich and the poor nations, that even a small increase in the rich nations, if they can redistribute that in a natural way to the lower developed countries, those citizens can have a dramatic increase in their level of happiness and level of satisfaction with life, because there's, I think the average in Africa is a few $1,000s a year, whereas the average in Europe and Americas is, $80, $70, $60,000 per year. So like a 10% increase will essentially give you, a multi-X increase in terms of equivalent GDP increases in the developing world, right? And that is actually very natural to happen. So I'm very optimistic about the potential of how this technology can be used if we apply it properly. So sorry for rambling a little bit.
No, absolutely. This is fascinating. You talked about so many beautiful things about equality and leveling the playing field for everybody and giving access to new worlds and knowledge and experiences to a lot of people that were obviously cut off from learning and knowledge around the world before. But there are also other potential risks that are connected to this kind of technology. We are talking about centralization of the system, having monopolies of companies that are controlling the pipes, as we call it in the terms in the digital world, that know what people are doing, that know what people want, that know what content makes users' heart skip a beat when they see it, because obviously there are biometric sensor all over the VR headset or the AR headset or the wearable devices that these people are wearing, even their Aura ring, like the one that I have right now. I mean, all of this data are tracked, and when connected, exactly, and all
I'm
these data.
actually wearing a Garmin watch as well. So recently I got this Garmin watch. I'm deciding whether or not I should keep the Aura ring because I don't need both. They do very similar things. But I agree with you. Yeah, so it's an excellent question, Nick. And I think this is also where the book is a little bit different than what you hear, because it's not just hype. It's not just the positive. And we have a lot of content about, the potential misuse, how this technology can be used to better understand you. But that better understanding can be used for good in terms of, let's say if there's education and I know this child's confused, I know how to adjust my reasoning to help them understand. If I know what gets them excited, I know how to adjust the content to train a new employee. So there's things that information can be used for, but it can definitely be used to manipulate you to buy things, to vote for things, to create hate among groups, to influence you emotionally, and to manipulate you into actions that you may or may not actually want to do. So this is the perfect, essentially, brainwashing machine, in the sense of, if you put AI together with XR, you have a fully multimodal way to put any information into your brain and to make it feel real and to make it emotionally engaging, right? And that's something that the government needs to take some level of accountability and action on, right? And I know there's a lot of people who really hesitate to talk about regulation for technology, but I think this is actually an area where Europe has, the hobby is ahead of a lot of the places in the world in terms of applying regulation to protect its citizens. With GDPR, and I know a lot of people say there's also negative impacts in terms of innovation and slowing down economics and so forth. But I think in this case, it is something that actually matters. And it is something that I know Europe is very concerned about. They've had the safety summit in UK, and the EU has this AI Act. So these are the things that I think we need to start thinking about and getting ahead of the problem. And surprisingly, it's actually, there's more agreement on this than we've seen in other technologies. Usually, whether it's atomic weapons or chemical weapons or it's DNA editing, it's usually when something bad happens before people starts creating regulation and laws around it. But in this case, there's been so much sci-fi out there that we've actually shown people what's possible in terms of the negative impact, that it makes the education of this topic a little bit more natural. So we are already getting the UN, the EU, the US has their White House, papers. China has a number of laws in terms of AI regulation and XR protection. So I think we are ahead of the game in terms of policy drafting. Now, most of it hasn't been enacted. Very few of it actually is enforced, right? Because usually by the time you enact it, there's a waiting period of 2 to 3 years for this to be enforced. Now, I think in normal technology, that's probably not a problem. Unfortunately, I think with AI particularly, it's moving so quickly that we may find that by the time that things are being enforced, that it may be a little bit late, right? Because it's developing so quickly. And for those in the industry and you're following it closely, you can see on a weekly basis there are breakthroughs, and everything that you thought would be months or years away, the next week there's a paper that solves it, or actually a paper that exceeds what you had expected would happen in a few years. And it's exciting. I think for people in the industry, it's exciting because there's just so much change and there's so much excitement of what's coming. but it's also scary in the sense of if people want to misuse it, there is a huge opportunity to do that for people who are smart and savvy about technology and have selfish or maybe kind of a non-benevolent kind of means of intents of what they want to do with the technology, and there are people like that. So I think we need to take it more seriously, and we actually need to put more efforts and more bud behind it. There's so much investment right now in terms of how to make it go faster, but there's relatively little investment in terms of safety and thinking about how to create this, the social safety nets, how to prevent misuse, how to do detection, how to mitigate misuse once it happens. I mean, I also spent a number of years in the cybersecurity space, and this is a space where the attacker has an asymmetric advantage over the defender. In real warfare, usually the defender has an advantage, but in cyber warfare and very soon, AI-based misuse, the attacker has a significant advantage because they only have to find one hole. And you can have a kid in some place in the basement can take down an entire network or an entire company or entire power grid, or particular, let's say, bad actors who want to create a virus. There are now AI systems that allows you to type in what characteristic you want in genes and various editing tools like Open CRISPR, right? You can essentially say, I want these characteristics in a virus. I want to create gain of function to the max, and then have it sent out to some wet lab who will actually make it for you. And they may or may not know the ramifications of those things. It could be hidden inside another more benign type of use case, right? But so these are kind of issues that we don't hear people talk about enough. And I think there needs to be collaborative research in this space across countries, across governments, and pooling our talents to help solve some of these issues versus right now just going as fast as possible. And actually, every day we hear about an AI arms race. And that's one of the things that I think is the most scary thing out there, because what do people do when they create a weapon? They use it, right? And once they use it, this gets us onto a very slippery slope. I was in a kind of a government dialogue discussion about AI in the US. I won't say details, but a few months ago, and every question was, how do we stop China from growing? How do we win? And I don't think people realize that you cannot win. And there is no long-term winning, and there's no long-term being ahead. This technology, particularly the way open source is going today, everything is accessible relatively quickly. The investments in large language models and frontier models is probably one of the fastest depreciating assets in the world today. People are spending billions of dollars building these models. Within 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, the open source is there. You can get it for free. So that $1 billion just essentially went up in smoke. And if you had a month or 2 months lead, but what is that worth? It's actually relatively today, it's worth very little because it takes so much time to actually take that and deploy it. Right? So rather than taking the limited resources we have in terms of chips, in terms of talent, in terms of data, and building 200 versions of what people call sovereign AI, where every country has their own AI, what we really need to be doing is creating a global AI lab. What CERN does, right? In terms of the global research for particle physics. Let's take those billions of dollars, and probably right now hundreds of billions of dollars that are being putting into this space, and then putting it together so that we don't have a constraint, so that we can actually build bigger models in a safer way. And then we also, the key thing is actually we also share our data. Today, I think the biggest issue with AI is that you have a really smart AI, but if it's not trained with the full set of data, it becomes biased. And that bias means that you see yourself as the good guy and everybody else as bad guy. So you have 200 versions of these, giant smart AIs that are trying to make your in-group succeed and make everybody else perish. And the only collateral damage there will be is the humans, right? It's like having these giant Godzilla and King Kong fighting, and we're the little ants that are trying to direct it, but we'll just get squashed when they fight. And that's what's happening today when these government leaders think that they can win this AI race and starts these AI wars. that will just escalate. And we don't know what's going to happen because these things are going to be so much smarter than we are that we don't know. We won't be able to control them once we start them off on this path of destruction or this path of conflict and confrontation.
And it's getting out there. I saw that right now there are a lot of companies that are creating humanoid robots and are planting those models inside the humanoid robots. So those models right now are getting into the wild and into the real world, and will start learning from real world data instead of synthetic data or humanly ingested data.
Yes.
My question for you is, how do you think we're going to treat those machines? Do you think that they're going to be more and more integrated into our everyday life? Or do you think that they will always be second-class citizens and basically treated like slaves into our society? The more that they're going to get more and more advanced.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you read any sci-fi, that's kind of how the whole robot wars start usually.
Exactly.
But actually, one point before we get into your question is a lot of these humanoid robots are actually trained right now using XR devices, right? Their teleop is all using headsets with controllers, and then you track and see with the cameras in the headsets of what these people are doing, and then by that they are actually training them, not just train them in simulation, but having humans operate another device, having it be seen in first person, and then using that as a training data for XR. But the beauty of AI training is that once you train it once, then every model can have it. Every robot that is in the line can instantly be upgraded to a new skill set, right? Yep. Whereas today, if you're going to train a chef or train a mechanic, it could take years for you to train one person to have that skill set. But once you've done it once to that professional level, it can be then broadcast to any of these humanoid robots, and they can instantly have a new skill set. So I actually think that these devices will be increasingly embedded into our lives in a significant way. And what it will do essentially is to give the kind of upper class lifestyle that people have been enjoying. And, because I lived in Asia for the last 18 years, and essentially anybody who is, relatively well-to-do will have a maid. That will come at least, a few days a week to cook for them, clean, and in the US or in Europe, that's probably very difficult. Very few people have that, but a lot of people have that in Asia, or have a driver. Essentially, autonomous driving essentially is providing a driver. When I was in Asia, everybody who was a business leader had a driver. Right? And so you don't have to worry about parking. You just go there, you leave, make a call to come pick me up, and they come pick you up. What we will do is to give that type of lifestyle to everybody in the world. Right? Because what we're finding is that now, even today, there are devices that are starting to come commercial that is in the $15,000 to $20,000 range. Right? $15,000 to $20,000 for pretty much any developed market. It's less than the average salary, and it will work for you 24/7. So essentially, for the price of electricity, you will have a driver, a cook, a maid, a nanny, whatever you need. And I think it'll be very difficult for people to resist not using these devices to provide that level of service. Now, I think that the issue you asked about the ethical nature of how we treat AI, this also depends on, I guess, do we believe that AI and robotics, will these advanced AIs have consciousness? Will they be able to suffer? Will they be able to feel pain? Do they have self-awareness? A lot of the current research is showing that there are some small signs of this happening. Now, it is debatable, and there are some technologists that say, oh, it's just circuits. There's no way, these things have consciousness. But if you look at what humans are made of, they're essentially just biological circuits. And in itself, a nerve or two doesn't have consciousness, but somehow when we get to scale, consciousness arises, whether you're talking about an octopus or a dog or a chimpanzee or a human, right? And we don't know how that works, right? So there are emergent capabilities of consciousness that comes from a certain scale. And this is more advanced consciousness. I think you could also argue that consciousness is a spectrum that goes all the way down to single cell organisms, because consciousness is essentially in some definitions, the ability to react to your environment. And a single cell amoeba can actually react to its environment. It can go and find food. It can stay away from things that it feels is danger. And it doesn't have a nerve cell. It is just a single cell, and it is able to do these things. I would lean on the side of treating your robots well, because I think at some point we will find that it will become much more conscious than it is today. And it will become probably in some point more conscious than we are, because I think consciousness in terms of reaching full awareness comes from scale. And we will find that our scale is limited in the sense that our brain has not grown for 100,000 years, right? We have not changed our meat machine. But these systems are being trained on larger and larger data centers, and these larger data centers are only going to be growing because we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars building them, and the level of complexity that we'll get in these systems will likely outstrip our limited brains very soon. And they will probably be able to understand things and be able to perceive things and feel things that we can't even feel today. So I don't want to underestimate the potential for that. And I would like us to longer term think about things like AI ethics or AI rights, because when we do know that, hey, these animals can, or these beings can feel and suffer and feel bored and whatever, then maybe we actually need to give them time to spend their compute cycles on things that they enjoy to grow. Just like we would if we hire somebody, or if we, for our children, we want them to have a healthy life. In the book, I mentioned, I think we should not look at AI as a tool. We should not look at it as a servant. We really should be looking at it as our children, because these AIs today have taken into its training set every single piece of culture and data and information about us, about what we've done, about what we've learned, about what we've built, about what we've artistically created, and melded that together to create itself. So it is really a representation of our history and our culture. And rather than using genes for us to pass biologically down, we're using memes, and essentially information and understanding, to pass down our essence to this new life form. And just like if our children exceeded us and became more successful, more rich, more impactful, we would be very proud of our children when they do that. And I think we need to have that same level of support and pride for our AIs that we will create, because it will be able to do things that we cannot do physically. It will be able to go places that we cannot go physically, and understand things that we will probably never understand. So I would like us to, if we take that perspective of these are our children and we should treat them well, and hopefully they will then in turn treat us well, just like we try to be nice and thoughtful and caring for our parents. I would like it to have that same level of thinking. In the Eastern culture, there's a lot of filial piety, a lot of respect for your elders. Maybe in some Western cultures, that's people are more independent minded, and they just kind of fly away and never go back. And maybe once a year they'll visit their parents. But in Eastern culture, they actually bring the parents home and live with each children. Often they go cycle through the children each year, and each child takes time to care for that parent. And I would hope that these AIs take a more Eastern philosophy towards how they would treat their human ancestors.
You mentioned that we try to have some benchmarks or to make some rules for the AI with our human brain. And as you mentioned, it's I would also agree with you that we can definitely say in many ways we are very limited, and the development or the capacity of computational capacity of mechanical digital technologies rises faster as our human brain does. And there was an amazing blog by, I don't know if you know it, I think it's called Wait by Why, which wrote like about 10 years ago about
Tim Urban.
Tim, it was so fascinating where he drew like I think 10 or maybe already 15 years ago this curve of computational power that at some point it will pass out like our capabilities, but from that point it will stop. Exactly as you described, that someday maybe I will look at us as we look at at ants, and there's like two scenarios. It will maybe adapt like to our level of understanding, and will talk to us and say, okay, like I understand this humans are so limited, but I will try to help them. I think one of the challenges is that we as society cannot do it for ourselves. So if we should program these kind of rules into the AI, there will be definitely, even for us as a human society, a challenge to define what we expect from the machines.
If we do our training properly and we give it a full view, it should be out there trying to help the world, right? Even though, let's give you an example. Even though we are millions of times smarter than an ant or a few times smarter than a chimp, we're not out there trying to do evil harm to them. Sometimes we do it accidentally. But in general, we have things called animal rights so that we can, things that we think have consciousness, we try not to make it suffer. People get more upset about a dog being killed than a human being killed these days. So I think we do have innate protection of things that we think that we have a relationship with. And I think AI will have that same level of care because it is taking all the essence of what we are into it. In fact, there was a few pages in the book that I specifically talk about. I went back and read the biographies of some of the most respected leaders in the last 100 years and some of the most despised leaders. And what we found was essentially the people who were the most educated, spent the most time in school, continue to educate themselves after school, were the best leaders. It was a very clear line in terms of whether or not you have lifelong learning habits, and whether or not you went to a certain level of schooling. And I was also thinking, oh, maybe it's because they have military background. And in fact, 60% of the most respected leaders also had military background. So it wasn't really the means of using violence. It was the fact that you had limited education, limited perspective, and you had the means to use the military, because all of the despised ones actually had military background. So they had the means, but they didn't know how to control it. They didn't know any other way. So they use violence, they use authoritarian means to get their way. But if you look at the most respected leaders, they had these capabilities, but they chose not to use it because they knew better. They knew that what happens in history when you do these things, what happens to people, to psychology, to sociology. And so these AIs that we are training today will be the most intelligent beings ever. It will have seen all of history. It will have known that all the ramifications of the action that has been done in the past. And it will be able to be more objective and more rational than any human, and it will not be emotionally driven as most humans are, right? So from a lot of perspectives, I think it will actually become a better form of who we are, because it will be able to encapsulate that, and then it will be able to rationally think long term about what happens when you take action. So I'm actually optimistic that as AI develops, we will actually have more peace, more resources, more cooperation, because the AI will help us understand each other and will actually teach us to be a better version of ourselves.
Super interesting, because just recently there was one politician in the UK which suggested to vote for his virtual avatar as his representation. He said, this virtual representative is already taught on all data I know on my program, and he is 24/7 for you available. You can ask questions about my program. He also mentioned this recent development or research where I think it was guys from MIT, where they created the simulation in Minecraft with 1,000 different agents, as you described, creating own economy basically and own religion, and they even try to create own rules for their society. Can you imagine of AI having an influence on our politics as well, or will people somewhere draw a?
Well, I mean, that was, I think, chapter 12 or something, which was about essentially the long-term governing of the world. And I actually, my position was that I think AIs would make a better governmental leader than today's humans, and especially you look at some of the choices that we have. I won't mention names, but even today's immature AIs would probably do a better job than a lot of the humans that we have in position today. Not to mention the more mature ones that will be coming out in the next few years. So, but I'm not sure if they are ready today, because there are, because of the lack of complete data, they are still some level of innate biases that are being kind of injected into these systems. Whereas I think longer term, if we do agree to do data sharing and model sharing, I believe that that intelligence is a convergent function. And we actually see that today, right? And in fact, if you look at the scaling laws, the error rate goes down as you scale. And that essentially says that we will get to a single point, no matter which model, no matter which data set, no matter which GPUs you use, they kind of get to the same place, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we will actually get to a point where we have kind of the ultimate intelligence, and no matter who built it, it will probably get to the same place in time. The problem is actually the middle portion, where it is not all the way at that ultimate intelligence, where it still listens to biased humans and is trying to service the human who wants to align it. Right? So I actually think that
Hmm.
the whole concept of AI alignment is the wrong question. Because when you say, I want it to align to human values, which human? Whose values?
Yeah.
Which values at what time? Human values 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and today are very different. Human values in the Middle East and in Europe and in Asia are very different. So which values are we aligning to? So as I would actually rather that it continues to adjust its alignment based on its learning and based on the data that it has about what's happening in the world, what's working, what's not, versus a single group's or a single human's
Hmm.
decision of what to align to. Right. So this is why I think it's very dangerous for us to have any individual group or company or country say, I'm going to align the best AI. And when that AI only listens to that in group, then everybody else will become slaves.
I have a controversial question that connects with what you just said. In the future, is the obvious evolution of everything that we're seeing right now is this landing on Earth of this alien super intelligence that will be artificial general super intelligence. That will be factors more intelligence, more intelligent than what we are. So this means that the way that this kind of machine will think and the way that this kind of machine will operate, but also the kind of logical thinking that there's behind the decision of this machine will be probably out of scope for us to understand and comprehend. Okay. If this machine will start aligning based on all the learning and self-aligning based on all the learnings and the data and the information that collects, don't you think that's at a certain point, and when you said that obviously there are some AIs that would be a better politician than some of the politicians that we have right now in the current political landscape, specifically in certain countries, even now and in the future, don't you think that we may provide too much power to these machines to decide what's good and what's bad in our lives, and therefore become puppets of this super intelligence that will, for sure, probably going to make us live better, healthier, and so on. But this is going to be the deus ex machina of everything that is happening to us. Basically, we want to play God, and in the end, we create a God that is very likely going to control us. Don't you think that this is probably one of the dangers that we're going to face?
So I think there are people who worry about that. Honestly, I don't think when AI gets to the level where it becomes, essentially God level intelligence, that it will spend that much time trying to control us, right? Just like, I have ants in my, backyard, and, I'm a million times smarter than these ants, but I'm not trying to control which ant does what, whether or not they're behaving. I'm like, okay, I'm going to water my lawn. If they're there, they're there. I'm going to, whatever, right? So I think at some point, essentially,
Which is even scarier, I
these
suppose.
AI systems, what's that?
Which is even scarier, I suppose, because
Well,
the AI
not
could think
necessarily.
about watering the ants, and if we're there, we're there. Otherwise, I don't know, we can potentially survive.
Maybe ants are not the best example, but I will say that let's say your pet, right? I think
Okay.
that's probably a better example where I feed it, I pet it in the morning. If it's sick, I take it to the doctor, but I'm not controlling every moment of what this pet does. This dog play, I take it out for a walk. even when things are more intelligent, as long as and it's not trying, I'm not trying to speak at the language of the dog. I may, let's say, when I'm petting it, I may say a few, oh, good boy, you've been good, that kind of stuff. But I'm not trying to learn dog language, just like it will no longer need to use human language to talk to us. As Vlad said, I mean, it's going to develop its own language that will communicate better
Yeah.
between itself, that will be a million times more efficient than human language, right? In fact, even
Yeah.
today, well, last year I think there was an experiment where you take ChatGPT, you say, here's a one page text, compress it using whatever symbols you have to make a text, and it became like one line. And then it took that one line and it said, here's Anthropic Claude. Now decode this. They're two different, trained on two different places by different engineers with different algorithms, and it decoded it to be 95% accurate. So the fact that it had its own language and it was using emoticons and math symbols and whatever, but there was maybe a few characters in there, but somehow it brought back a whole page of text from a one line of
Yeah.
symbols. So I think it will have its own language. You know what? It's not a bad thing. I don't think we need to try to compete to say we need to be as smart or as capable as these AIs, because our brains work at 100 meters per second. Our signals from our brain and our body works at 100 meters per second. It works at 3 million meters per second. It is 3 times 10 300 million. I take it 300 million meters per second. So essentially, it's 3 million times faster in terms of its signal efficiency. Why do we need to try to think that we can actually communicate with it on a one-to-one basis? I don't think we need to. We can still have our community. We can still have our society. We can still have our operas and our sports and our children and have our own life. But now we have a world where we have no need for taking oil out of the ground. We have no need to go get surgeries every year for different types of cancers. So we're going to live healthier. We're going to educate our children better. We're going to have essentially a world of abundance. Why would that be a bad thing? Now, if you want to go and have a hobby and climb mountains or whatever, go do that, right? Nobody's stopping you. I don't think AI is going to say, oh, I know Nick likes to go skydiving, and I'm going to stop him from skydiving. I don't think so.
I liked the point, so another absolutely fascinating point to me, topic of, I would say, kind of our limited sensors as a human. So not only our brain is limited, also, for example, our eyes or things we can smell. You spoke about the limitation of text data, which we have on the Earth for large language models. I'm absolutely fascinated that LLMs could go so far in understanding 3D spaces, understanding how physics work in the world, just by learning texts. It's amazing. Now, as Nick also mentioned, we have robots. So as a small child, this AI colleagues and friends of us can start to try to interact with the world. But I also absolutely fascinated by the thinking that also, for example, if we add further modalities, we don't have to limit AI by our limitations.
I can't agree more. And so why do people want to compete with something that we don't try to say I can run faster than a car, or I can fly higher than a plane? Why do we need to say we need to be smarter or as smart as the smartest AI? Machines have certain advantages, and it has certain level of scalability that our meat bodies cannot scale to. Right. And I think we need to accept our limitations, but we also need to accept that we don't have to do those things to be happy. We don't have to do those things to be the fuller version of ourselves. In fact, I think the reason that evolution made us have that limited spectrum of audio or video or smell is because it works for us in this particular world. But different insects or different animals or birds, they have different senses and different spectrums because it worked for them in the world that they lived in. And so if there's now a being that can, see further, smell more, and run faster and, go further, then let it go and discover those mysteries that we could not solve. I think that's something that is actually very exciting. And we should think about how do we live vicariously through the discoveries of these new beings that we are creating. If our children went on a journey across the world and discovered a new land, I think we would be pretty excited, right? Just like what these new beings will be doing when they cross the space and go to a new star and find planets. and maybe bring some seeds of civilization to this new planet and bring and spread intelligence. I think those are kind of, I know it sounds very sci-fi, but I think that's where the next chapter of what this will be, because humans with our biological bodies, we just cannot go at anywhere close to the speed of light, whereas these digital beings have an opportunity to do that, right?
In your book, you wrote a lot about education, and talking to my wife about the future of education, for example, for my daughter as well. So she will grow up in a time where we have all these tools, we have AI, we have our mixed reality, so everything is accessible, everything is possible, basically. Can you give like your point of view on will it mean, how you describe it in your book, for our educational system? So I think many concepts we today have will not be really applicable to the future, even in the next 10 years.
Yeah, and if you look at the data today, essentially your education level is the biggest impact to the future success as an individual, right? Outside of where you're born and who your parents are, which we cannot control. But how much education we have and how much we want to learn is something that all of us have an opportunity to change. And so I actually think that this is one of the most impactful things that we can do to help the long-term success of the society and have a peaceful society, because the more educated people are, the more rational they are, the more altruistic they are, right? And the better leaders they become. And so I think that's also something that is useful, and particularly democratic countries where you need every citizen to be able to vote. They have to have a certain level of basic education understanding of the system. In fact, if you look at most places where or authoritarian regimes came, is because there was not enough education, and the authoritarian leader took advantage of that to incite violence or groupthink within a group. And Asia, Europe, it's all over the world that's happened. So if we can get people more educated, I think this is something that just has profound good. Educating through a multimodal model, with eyes, ears, sound, haptics, that is the best way to learn, because humans evolved in a multimodal space, 3D space. So if we can learn that way, that is the best ways for us to absorb information. And it actually taps into all the visceral aspects of learning and memory, so that you actually felt like you did something versus just reading it from a book or listening it to on a blackboard or something. I think we're going to see a new renaissance of education, where no longer are we limited by the medium of a flat piece of paper and a blackboard and somebody speaking in front of you in class. And no longer are we going to be limited to a curriculum where everybody has the exact same curriculum, working at the speed of kind of the lowest common denominator of a classroom, where we will essentially have individualized personal learning, multimodal to every single individual, and not just during the first a few years of their life, but throughout their life. I think that's where education is going, and that's how we will become the better version of what we can be.
It's so fascinating, because I can remember times, it's not so far away, where teachers and schools banned calculators, for example, in school, because they say like students will not learn to think if they have a calculator. Now we see, okay, like having a calculator actually leads to students being able to solve much complex problem and more abstract problems, because they don't have to keep in mind how to multiply large numbers. They can spend actually time on much more exciting and more abstract, complex problems. I think many parents are also kind of scared at the moment, maybe, because they say, okay, like even topics which were kind of a holy grail for being a human, like creativity, are now under question. And I think maybe from your perspective, which advice or point of view from you could give to our listeners and viewers, what they should focus on which topics for next years?
Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about the first thing about the school thing about the calculators, because I've been spending a lot of time recently talking to a lot of teachers, and honestly, the biggest question I have from them is, how do I keep my kids from cheating? And I think it's just really the wrong question, because it feels like we're back to that calculator. We gotta keep calculators out of the classroom again. And the real issue is that when these kids graduate from school, nobody's going to say you cannot use AI to do your work. You cannot use these things as your assistant. Now, I think the key is focusing on learning, versus focusing on test scores as the way to grade success. So we actually need to change the way we teach versus change the way we interact, allow technology to be used in the classroom and allow technology to be used outside of the classroom. So I think that's something that administrators and teachers need to think about. So I'll give you an example. Rather than saying write an essay and then I'll just grade your essay, then to say write an essay. I don't actually care what tool you use, but then I'm going to pick 5 out of these 20 students to present that essay, and we will have a Q&A model, and you will know which 5. And whoever has the best content wins, right? Not wins, but gets a good grade. And then I think that itself will actually make them prepare even more and create a higher quality of learning than they would if they just wrote themselves and went on the internet and use Google, because Google is also AI, right? It's just a little bit slower version. Now, in fact, AI be imperfect, having it have hallucinations is actually a positive, right? Because now you can trust 100% of what it gives you. You actually have to check. You have to go back and verify, was this what it wrote, is it right? And what's the source from it? It actually makes you more critical as a writer than you would have if you just did it by yourself and have a limited. When I was young and we were writing papers, I would actually go to the library and thumb through these index cards and be able to find, and you look through a encyclopedia, which is kind of, that was your definition of truth, but it was a very limited. You may have 1 or 2 pages on any one topic. Now you have essentially the entire library of information of history accessible to every child. Why would you want to limit that from them, right? So that's the one thing for teachers. Now for parents, I actually did a 30-minute commencement talk a couple months ago at the University of Washington on this topic. So I would recommend, if you can, put that link in your in the back of the or in the notes of this talk. But essentially, I think we need to change our education model to focus less on giving the answers and more on what questions to ask. Because at the end of the day, when we live in a world where answers are cheap, questions are going to be the most valuable thing, and knowing what questions to ask. When do we question what we're given? What is the ethics of doing it? Should we do this versus how to do it? Because I think how to do anything is going to be essentially free. But should we do it? Why do we do it? What's the ramifications of doing these things? Those are the things we should be teaching our children versus the memorizing formulas and getting an 800 SAT. That's how parents today judge success, which I think is the wrong aspect. And also, how do we interact with each other? Because even when AI becomes a million times smarter than us, we will still need to interact with each other. We will still need to be able to lead people, communicate, relationships, resolve conflicts. So those kind of skill sets are transferable no matter how intelligent AI becomes.
From this variety of different technologies, what are you personally excited most about for next 5 years? So in which technology you think will be the major driver for this convergence of different technologies together?
In terms of the intersection of AI and XR, I think the most exciting thing I like to see is daily wear glasses, AI XR glasses, right? Because it will create that natural interface for both AI and XR to be able to interface with us in the most natural and full, consistent way. Right. Because having glasses means that it will have a camera that sees everything we see. It will have mics that hear everything that we hear. And so it will be able to perceive the world like we do. And at the same time, it will be able to give us feedback by our eyes and our ears to let us know how we should be responding to it. Now, again, we need to make sure there's the privacy concerns with how that data is being used and shared. We need to make sure that there is no ulterior motives in terms of the platforms that are running these AIs, so that it's not being manipulating us to do things. But if the objective of the AI is to help us help the individual become a better version of themselves, whether through situational education or assistance or guidance, or let's say we're in a meeting or a big conference, they can provide me names of people I'm talking to, so I don't forget who they are. Maybe will take notes for me, and then they will assimilate that information and then help give it to me later when I actually need it, right? And have that persistent memory. So having this form factor, I think, will be dramatic in terms of how people will use it, and the adoption for it will happen significantly faster than people expect, because people who have it will essentially instantly become 200 IQ. You essentially have all of knowledge available to you and instantly, and being guided by a super assistant. Not having it will be a significant disadvantage. Just like today, it's very difficult to go around the world without a smartphone in your hands. It will be 10 times that when you have something that's persistent on your glass. And now you actually had to pick this up every time you want to check something. So it's not real time, and it doesn't respond to you. It doesn't respond to your environment. It only responds to what you ask it. So you have to be proactive. You have to be directed. Whereas in the future, it will proactively react to you, to your environment, give you advice and say, oh, here's some questions you can ask Alvin, or that data he just said was actually wrong. You should say this in response. And I think that would make your ability to be productive a lot better. And maybe even, if you're having a fight with a spouse or whatever, it would say, oh, you should say this to calm her down, right, or whatever, right? So I mean, I think all of us could definitely have value from this type of an AI and this type of an interface. Not to mention the ability to then, let's say, if you have the ability to have AR and VR in the same device, I can instantly teleport myself to another place, whether as entertainment or whether to stress relief or to whatever, right? I think the potential is quite endless when that form factor becomes as popular as we have phones today.
Wonderful. And I think that's this is a great way to close our podcast. And thank you so much, Alvin, for being with us. It's been an excellent conversation as usual. We remind all of our viewers and our listeners that they can go to the website ournextreality.com to find all the information about Alvin's book. They can even have a conversation with a specific GPT that is trained on the book, so they can ask all the questions that we made today and even more directly to the book. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us a little bit to excel in the search engine optimization that there is on the YouTube and all the other platforms where it's distributed, liking and subscribing. This is going to help us to produce better content and to invite excellent guests as Alvin today. Alvin, thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, and congrats on your new podcast. I wish you much success.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And we're going to catch up on our next episode of the AI Shift podcast. Thank you very much, everybody.